Everyone, welcome to Adeva's Fireside Chat. I'm excited to have Jonathan Rigby with me tonight. We will be discussing how to optimize team performance and efficiency. He is an established technical leader. He has been in the industry for many years now in various different roles, executive roles within multiple companies. So I'm very excited to get his insights around how to make engineering teams more productive, more efficient, how to measure performance, and optimize processes. Jonathan, welcome.
Hello, guess I'm back.
Hello, welcome back. Okay, so let's start with a quick introduction. I'd like for everyone to hear from you and not from me. Who is Jonathan Rigby? What has been your journey so far? I especially like to focus on the things that brought you here today and that you had to go through before you became able to share insights about team performance and optimizing processes.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. And look, first of all, I'm sorry for the beginnings. Just half an hour before this webinar started, I had problems with my broadband. I live in a very remote part of the UK, and so the mobile signal's not a good alternative. And so we had this. So if it does drop again, I'm very sorry, but we'll try and get in as much as we can. And we can always, as Kat suggested, we could always do this sort of offline. But I'm really keen to talk about this. The subjects that we've been planning to talk about. But before that, as promised, an introduction. So yeah, I'm Jonathan. I have been involved in software engineering for over 20 years. I started my life a long time ago as a software engineer. I always joke with my teams that I work with that I don't like to talk too much about my software engineering career because I'm using technologies that are very dated now, and it's quite embarrassing to sort of talk about it. But I moved into a software engineering leadership role after about sort of 6 or 7 years of being a software engineer. It was my first job as an engineering manager. And since then, probably for just around 15 years, I've been involved in some elements of software engineering, leadership, management, that type of thing, gradually sort of moving across different organizations. I've now worked right the way from early stage startup right the way through to large enterprises. I've managed teams, different shapes and sizes across different industries. I don't know what makes me somebody who can speak to that, but I've experienced software engineering and the challenges of software engineering in all these different environments. And I think what I've found is some of the topics I think that we're probably going to talk about today are challenges wherever you are. If you're in a startup, if you're in an enterprise, the idea of engineering productivity and estimations and that type of thing, they remain constant. There'll be different aspects to them in terms of what that looks like exactly, but the core fundamentals are largely the same, whatever environment you work in. So that's me. I've, as I said, been in software engineering 20 plus years. I've got some ideas, but I think the great thing about these types of occasions are an opportunity really to put ideas out there to discuss. I don't think we'll find a magic bullet to a lot of the different things that we'll be talking about, but if we can at least sort of move the conversation on or have different ideas of how we can solve or get towards a better solution, then that's what I'm really about as well, because some of these are core issues that really impact our teams, our engineers. If you're an engineer, they impact you. And so it's always good to improve in those areas.
And with this event, it's always about getting a different perspective because we are talking to multiple different leaders from different companies, and we want to dive into their personal experience to learn from it. So everything that you're about to share will definitely be useful in shaping the perspective of people in our audience today. I want to dive a bit deeper into the actual challenges, if you can remember some of them, something specific that you have encountered during the years when it comes to driving efficiency within engineering teams. What have been the main challenges? How did you overcome them? Maybe some actual steps that you can share in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think improving efficiency is what we're often about in software teams. I think we're engineers, so it fits nicely with what we want to do. We want to look at our process and see, where the bottlenecks are, where there's areas that we can improve. I suppose the agile process is very much around that, and on the team-based level, looking at areas of challenge and struggle, and sort of seeing where we can improve. But then you sort of zoom out, and when you're working with teams, lots of different teams across an enterprise, then again, there's those sort of challenges that bubble up, and you wanting to look at, how you can improve that. So there's the sort of team level, micro level ways of improving efficiency, and then all the way up to, what can you as a sort of a VP of engineering or the director of engineering do to improve that. So there's lots of different things, and I think everybody's got their own sort of takes on that. But I think, some of the key things are around, if we just look at the sort of the process part of it, and we specifically focus on the continuous integration, continuous delivery, because I think that is something that is really key and core. Put in cycle time with that, and making sure that that is quick and effective. Those are the areas where we can make, as engineers and engineering teams, we can make significant inroads and impact. And that's, when that, I think back to when I was a first engineer, I alluded to it a long time ago now, but we didn't have the idea of continuous integration, continuous deployment. You would create a big bang release, once a quarter, and you develop your software, and then you release it to your customers there. And I think we're in a lot better space, because we can now develop things quickly. We can put it out to our customers. We can see whether there's value. They can be able to use it and feed back to us quickly. And so that aspect of our sort of software process, having efficiency in that part of the process, is really core to adding value to our business, which is what we're largely about as engineers. We're trying to be that part of the business which really adds value, particularly when we're product based and we're focusing on an engineering product. So that's a key part. And of course, there are lots of things that go alongside that that you can look to improve upon. So deployment frequency. I mean, the DORA metrics, which is a set of metrics that have been sort of put into the engineering environment more recently as a way in which we can look at improving efficiencies. It's interesting because the challenge with the DORA metrics themselves are that they only look at one aspect of the whole cycle, which is that sort of from code commit through to release. But there's efficiencies to be gained and processes that we can put in place all the way further back in the process. And maybe we can talk about some of those, because they are, in my perspective, are just as important as those processes around code review through to release and through to DevOps, getting the site back up in process. So it's really important to have that part of the process. Well, it will vary very much on your business model. So for example, the aspect of the DORA metrics, which is making sure the mean time to resolve those types of DevOps style metrics are really critical, particularly if you've got a site that is something like a B2C model with hundreds of thousands of users, of customers on there. So I worked at Expedia, and that aspect of your process and making that part of the process really efficient was absolutely core and critical to our business, because every minute the site was down was costing tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds. And actually during our post-mortem process, what we used to do was we used to equate the downtime that we had associated with that with a dollar value. And there were significant dollar values, because if people couldn't book a holiday, couldn't book a hotel, and people were using it around the globe because it was a global company, that had significant impact into the customer, into the business.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'd like to circle back to that a bit later when we discuss more about metrics and everything. One thing that you mentioned, continuous integration, continuous deployments. There is a lot of debate around deploying on Fridays. Some people are proponents and some not. What's your stance on that? Should we have a dedicated day for deployment? Should we avoid deploying before weekends, or should it be like a constant, keeping everything as it gets ready without releasing it to the users?
I mean, I think it depends. And I think the reason for sort of saying that is you've got to be thinking about your business. And ultimately, as software engineers, I've alluded to before, we're there to support the business and to do what's right for the business. Now, it will also, there's other factors at play. So, for example, when are your customers using the system, and therefore when are the real sort of danger points for releasing new software? It might depend on the size of the release, the complexity of the release. Largely, we've because we don't have, in the companies I've worked on, a really round-the-clock, robust on-call process. We've tended to avoid Friday afternoons or the Friday before bank holiday, or we have a Christmas code freeze because the majority of the team are going to be off. The premise being let's balance the risk against the reward of deploying on a particular time of day or part of the year. So I don't think there's a one size fits all on that, but you've got to recognize and be sensible about it, because if you've got a skeleton on-call process over the weekend, and you don't want your engineers, because they've worked hard during the week, to be contacted, then you shouldn't. So, but there may be some good reasons too, or a particular opportunity that the business has, and you always take those into balance when you're sort of thinking of, again, this is the risk if the site goes down, but this is a potential reward for the business for doing it, and cut your cloth accordingly.
Right. There was one interesting talk that I heard once, and I think it's a practice from extreme programming, when they constantly deploy, regardless of, they don't have a schedule for deployments, but they are using feature toggles and that type of strategies to keep deploying code without releasing it to the users. And it was, they were kind of proponents for it because it increased the code stability and how tested it is and how it affects the general code base. So it was an interesting perspective, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. I think I think we can be understandably nervous about deploying code or complex code frequently and in this sort of way. And so it's right that we use the right tools to be able to protect ourselves and the users from things. So feature toggles are really important. I've never worked anywhere that's an advocate of testing in production as the way in which they sort of test. I mean, that is really putting it out there but I can see and understand the basis for doing that. So again, I think it's about taking a pragmatic approach, really understanding what you need to do. I think what I'd want to see is that backed up by engineering managers and business leaders supporting their engineers in whatever approach that they take. So if we are going to, because we need to accelerate and to move quickly in what we're trying to do, deploy frequently, deploy regularly, maybe take sort of risks, then we need to create that psychologically safe environment where if mistakes are made, then there's no blame or finger pointing, that it all fits together in the terms of the culture that we're trying to create. And I just think that that's important. I think you can't have, oh yes, let's deploy frequently, and we're going to haul you over the coals if the site goes down.
Yeah, that's an excellent point that you raised. I completely agree with it. We can circle back to metrics now. In addition to what you were explaining, I'd also like to touch on metrics for engineering teams, like general productivity, measuring their efficiency, their performance, but on the other side, having that psychological safety that you just mentioned. Like, how do we measure without making the team feel like they're constantly being monitored and micromanaged, or like feeling unsafe?
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point, and we should hold that when we're sort of thinking about metrics. And you're right, it's something that I've I suppose had issues with the use of metrics in particularly measuring software performance and productivity and that type of thing, because I just think that there's lots of potential pitfalls in doing that, and I've seen it really come unstuck. And so a few things I think I'd say on this is that, again, thinking about the culture, if the culture is right and that you measure, if you're thinking about productivity of teams and you're doing it with the right intention, and that is to try to, if you're a leader in an engineering world, you're doing it to therefore identify areas that are challenging and support the teams where things are not going well in a particular area, then again, that type of psychological safety, I think, can mitigate some of the issues that developers might have around, oh, there's Big Brother watching me, they're looking at everything, they're comparing me to that team or that other engineer, and therefore I'm really not happy about this. And in the worst cases scenario, and I've seen it happen, I'm just going to game the metrics. So, I know you're measuring me on this, but you know what? I'm smart. I know I can do this. I can game what we're doing. And so actually your metrics are of no value. And so you can really degenerate into not a great place and setting up engineers against sort of business. And so that's why the engineering culture that you're in is so critical and key to that. So when we're thinking about productivity, I always think it's more than just these measurable metrics, cycle time or number of commits and that type of thing. You can use those, they're useful tools, but incorporate it with all the other aspects that you need. But one other thing about metrics that I think is again, maybe quite helpful is when it happens in a more bottoms up approach. So the team themselves, or the departments, they determine the metrics that they think are going to be useful to help them improve their own productivity and performance. And that's really important because, then you've got buy-in from the team. It's the thing that's really important. So developer experience, this is blocking us. What can you as an engineering leader or manager do in that space? So it then also sort of puts a responsibility on you as an engineering manager or leader to do something about that in order to support the team in moving those metrics. So that type of bottoms up approach, I think, can also be useful when we're using metrics, so that we're not just, yeah, you're right. Look, yeah. Managers are like scrutinizing different numbers in a meeting together and pointing fingers.
And from your practice, are there some metrics that could be generally applied in the engineering teams, regardless of the company setup? Things that you'd like to share with?
Yeah, people? So I think one of the things that is, I think there was a sense of all metrics can be gamed, all metrics can, there's no real value because what do they actually sort of mean? And I think you can go down that road. And I'm not going down that road because I think that there are value, but you've just got to, as I said, frame them in the right way, in the right circumstances and situations. And so some of the so after the DORA metrics, there was researchers from Microsoft and GitHub got together and basically said, actually, yes, DORA is good, but it only incorporates that part of the process. And what we need to be thinking about is something a bit more holistic. And it can't just be that sort of throughput type metrics, because also what that fails to recognize is what also impacts productivity is the developer happiness or and how they're sort of feeling. If they're just part of a machine that is just churning out features, then that's also going to have an impact on productivity, because they may feel like they're just part of a cog in a machine. They're not really understanding the purpose behind what they're doing. That they can get burnt out because they're just constantly sort of churning through features. And so this group of people devised the space metrics, which the space metrics incorporates some elements of what we might say more qualitative metrics. So what engineers or teams are saying about what they're doing and the type of work they're doing and how interesting it is, or that. So satisfaction is part of that. How they're communicating and collaborating between product and engineering and stakeholder, that's the C of space. So I think it's something like satisfaction, performance. I'm looking at my notes actually, so that I don't get it wrong. Activity, communication, and efficiency and flow. And all of these things, some can be measured using our sort of tooling, but some are more qualitative and have to be reported on by the engineers and the engineering teams themselves. So use of sort of surveys in order to understand that element of the productivity. So I think the combination of those is a lot better than what cycle time or the DORA metrics give us. So it's a step in the right direction. But you'll never be able to measure everything. But I think, thinking about that and making sure that you are aware of that can be really sort of helpful. So I do like that element of the evolution of like metrics to measure productivity.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have one question more specific. You mentioned estimations earlier in the intro, and it's something that has been a problem for, I think, every team that I have discussed with in the past. There are some techniques. There are people who are trying different approaches to estimations, adding buffers and stuff. It usually never works. What's your tip around estimating properly? Like, how do we get it right? How do we get it in service of the development team?
Well, we won't get it right. I think it's fair to say. Well, I think we will rarely get it right. And you alluded to lots of different ways in which people have tried to get better. And there are lots of techniques, and I've seen them all. I've tried them all, and I don't think that there is that magic bullet that will give you, if you use this formula. And in actual fact, there is a formula that you can use, which is very complicated. It's called something called the Kokomo formula or the Kokomo model. And what you do, it takes a number of different input parameters. I think it's about 10 to 15 different input parameters. And then it uses that to generate a number. So it's finding a sort of, I suppose, a numerical or algorithmic way of determining what the estimate is. But it uses sort of pseudo measures in order to understand what different elements of those input parameters. So we'll talk about team cohesion. And you're supposed to put in a number, like if your team is, got strong cohesion, then you put in a particular number into that formula. And if it's not as strong, then you put in a different. So there's a lot of subjectivity even in that, which is a sort of pseudo objective model. So all that's to say, lots of time, money, energy has been invested in this, and we're still I don't think any closer to a type of solution. And so the reason was, therefore, that there was this no estimates movement that was born out of this frustration with, partly because, engineers were really getting burnt from it, because what they would do is they would come up with estimates, putting their best efforts in, but of course, until you really get deep into some code, you don't know all the potential sort of challenges. And so they were often underestimates. But then, project managers and business owners would sort of say, well, why are you not able to do it? You said that this is how long it would take, and you don't. And so engineers would end up working late over weekends and really getting burnt through that. So I understand where the no estimates movement came from, because engineers are sort of saying, hey, we're just not winning on this. This is it's all the bad side, all the downside is on us, because we can't estimate. We're saying that we can't estimate, but you want something from us. You want a deadline. And so we're trying to jump through the hoops, and we're not getting to a point that sort of really works. So the no estimates sort of said, look, there's no value in it. Let's not waste our time doing it. In fact, let's use that time that we would spend creating estimates, writing the software that we're trying to estimate, which we can't do. So I totally get that. And I think that's a very valid thing. However, what I do say about estimates, and it's not a formula, but it's a foundational element that I think will help us move the needle in this whole topic. And that is really sort of focusing on building trust with our stakeholders when we come to developing software in this whole area of like, how long will it take? And I think that there's some sort of practical elements that we can do in that area. And that is basically to say, well, there are things that we won't know, but that when there are things that we do know, then we should try and adhere to that. So I'll give you an example. So at that, we're wanting to release a new product. There's lots to do. It might take 6 months. But we're breaking it down into incremental parts that we can, or we have got a better idea of how long it takes. And so I'm all for, at the sprint level, if you like, having a go at trying to sort of say, okay, that we think that we can do this in this sprint, and really try and commit to that. And when we commit to it, trying to deliver on that commitment. And I think there's ways in which we can do that. Making sure that we're working with the product team on an MVP, I think is key to that. I think also making sure that we don't, I've used the term gild the lily. I don't know if people will understand that phrase, but making, really overdoing something for the sake of doing that. Because what we've got to remember is, if in most cases, we're in businesses that are there to generate profit, and they have a business model to do that. And so we can't be taking liberties with the way in which we develop product to do that. So we need to be pragmatic. We need to develop in a certain way. And so all of this type of thing, I think, really sort of builds trust. I also think it's really helpful to make sure that people really understand as much as they can about the challenges that we have as engineers when we're coding. I use the analogy that we try and use like thought experiments to try to explain, because people are like used to like a builder coming around and sort of saying, okay, well, I know if I want to build this room on your house, I know it's going to take me 2 weeks. And so people are in that mindset. If they're not technical people, they go, well, how do you not know how long it is to build that piece of software? My builder can give me a pretty good idea. And it's because like building a house is very different to building software. And what I try to do is there's a really nice analogy that you can use. Is like, okay, well, imagine you've got a skyscraper and you want to decide you want to put a new feature in, but you want to insert a swimming pool that is cantilevered from the skyscraper between the 20th and the 21st floor. Okay. And you want an estimate for that. That's going to be more challenging for your builder. Well, that's what we're trying to do with our architecture sometimes. So using that type of thought experiment or analogy, I think, can also be helpful in explaining why we're having problems with estimations.
And what about the other side, like engineering teams when they're trying to estimate? Because we are committing to a sprint, let's say, and not talking about a project as a whole, but simple estimates, simpler estimates for shorter periods of development time. And we need to commit to something to understand what we can and what we can't deliver in those 2 or 3 weeks. What are the things that developers themselves can ask the team, the questions that they should pose to understand the challenge better before they jump into estimating it? Like, I don't know the code. I'm new to this part of the system. What are the questions that would help me understand the potential challenges of developing this part?
Yeah, and I think at that sort of shorter time frame, there are things that you can do, and I think, I think every engineer is now used to, making sure that we'll look at spikes in order to look at the problem that we're trying to do, and to do that and spend some sort of time doing that, planning together as a sort of team. So using everybody's experience and strengths in different parts of the system that we know that we're going to do. So more of a collaborative affair rather than it just be one individual sort of doing that. I'd also say is that really developing that relationship between the product and engineering team is really critical to this, because I think even at that sprint level, things can take more time because there's misunderstanding between what the product manager or product owner is wanting and what the engineer understands to be the problem. And so what I've done in my teams, and really keen that people do this, is to make sure that firstly the engineers are close to the problem statement, so they understand the customers, they understand the challenges, but they're also involved in that stage right at the beginning, which we might call ideation, and that they're understanding what the challenges are and what might be coming down the road, and so that they're fitting that into the bigger picture. And I think if you do things like that, you can minimize the impact of, when I used to be a developer, I was just given like a 10-page specification that the product team had just sort of developed, and they mapped it all out, they put the buttons on, and they just gave it to me, and I was just a code monkey, and I'm just churning out code. And I think we've really moved on a long way from that, and I think it's really important because it helps us when we're planning, but also the unseen benefit of this type of thing is really improving engagement. And I think if you improve engagement between the engineers and the product and the customer, then that, thinking back to the productivity angle, that will also improve productivity. Or that's what I've seen, or is that people they want to be part of that rather than they just, as I said, be a code monkey.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that collaboration between the product and engineering side of the team, it's very important for at least setting the expectations right of what can be achieved and what can't be achieved in a certain time frame.
Yeah, it's a really critical relationship. It is the most critical relationship, and you know that because you see it when it breaks down. When it breaks down, it's terrible. You've got finger pointing between product and engineering. Oh, they didn't write the story well enough. Oh, they're just inefficient. It's in everybody's interest to make sure that there's real understanding in that. And what I'd also include in that is not just understanding things in a sort of mental capacity, but having empathy. So an empathy between product and engineering is a real powerful thing when it works well. Understanding the different challenges that, so if you're an engineer, understanding the challenges of the product manager, and the product manager is, the challenges that they have is that they're, of course, got a number of stakeholders they need to appease. They're not directly in charge of the engineers, so they've not got that relationship where, not that we do have that, where they can tell people what to do. So that's really sort of challenging from them. So they've not got that direct influence on the engineering team. But then on the flip side, I want my product managers to really understand the challenges around engineering and the legacy codes that we're having to work in, and technical debt. And actually, as a sort of a feel-good story, one of the best ways I've sort of seen this happen is a product manager and engineering manager really developing an understanding and an empathy for each other and the challenges that each other face, such that when there was a roadmap planning or process where we wanted to work out what we're going to do in the next quarter, I had the product manager advocating for technical debt items, I had the engineering manager advocating for product features that would really improve our customers' use of the system. So, like, as I said, you can often get that sort of tension, but when it goes well, it's so powerful, and we should really try and aim for it.
Yeah, that's a great story. Empathy on the highest level, right? I wanted to dig a bit more into distributed teams, but also let's start first with how do you balance between the agility, the speed of adapting to new requirements or new technologies of the team. So we want to keep that agility, that innovative approach, but we still need some more stronger processes and measurements and things that will keep us on the right track. How do we balance between the two, high quality standards versus speed and agility?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm somebody, process is really a key part of engineering, and we need to establish it. But I'm also a real strong believer in autonomy, and the reason for that is I think, again, it's quite an engaging thing for engineers to have. Everybody wants to have a degree of autonomy, but in that include the creativity and innovation that you can also get. And again, that's a really important element to people's motivation. So I want a good balance between the two. And I think generally, what's been very helpful and useful is having engineering teams and also engineering leaders who have real interests in different aspects of this. So we talk about people, process, delivery, and team in terms of aspects of what a software engineering manager leader should be thinking about. And you need all of those constituent parts. And so the balance between sort of process and innovation is something that can be in tension with each other, because, speed of throughput in order to get things delivered to production quickly is really key. However, we should also have the mindset, and it's something that business leaders and product managers need to have, but we at engineering can contribute to this, that amount of stuff does not necessarily equal value. So, there's a real tension, because there's a real pressure to ship a lot of features. More features is something that will be great for the customer, but actually, sometimes, in a way, some products have been really moved on is because that there's a degree of innovation and something that is innovative, and it's not quantity, it's that creativity and innovativeness, not really a word, that is the game changer. And actually, that's what we care about. It's the value that we bring to the customers, not the number of features. I don't think a customer, often, if you think about your general customers, they're not going to go, oh, great, I've got all these new sort of features. There may be cases when that happens, but sometimes to set us apart from our competitors, actually, it's that innovation, that creativity. So that's why I want a balance of the two. I don't want also, just to sort of put the counter argument and make sure that I'm not advocating a free-for-all where, engineers can just go off and just sort of play around and try new stuff, is that we do need to have sense of purpose in terms of the delivery. We can't all be just doing blue sky thinking all of the time and never really creating anything either. So a good balance, like it is in everything in engineering, it's having that healthy balance and that discussion around it.
I love it how you keep challenging the ideas that you share. So you share one perspective and then you counterpoint with another, finding the right balance between the two. I think that's something that we need to speak about more in software development, because things have become very dogmatic. People are kind of too focused in certain direction without thinking about the context and the value. So I love how you framed all of this.
Yeah, that's a really. I'm pleased that I have demonstrated that at least a little bit, because I can be quite quick to see the challenge or the negative side of certain things that we were doing. We talked about estimations, we talked about metrics, and it's easy or easier to point the finger and to sort of say, oh, that's terrible, we can't be doing that. And then reasonably, somebody who is on that side of the argument will say, well, what are you going to do instead? You know, what's your solution then? It can, and we could, I think I've seen this quite a bit in sort of engineering, like you suggest, that we're dogmatic in our approach and we point out the problems in somebody else's solution. Whereas actually what we need to do is we need to find some good middle ground that we can make progress on. So it's a good, healthy reminder that we can't be the what is it, I think it's the Eeyore character or the Cassandra character who's always looking at the negatives. And we should be also thinking about, well, how can we move it in a positive sense?
In a similar fashion, I want to continue with the question for working with distributed teams, because we have two opposing views on two sides. I've been thinking about open source development, open source teams, people working on those projects for years now, even before everyone was remote. And the processes that they have in place, the way people collaborate with each other, the sense of contribution is on the highest level. Open source projects are most likely the best developed projects out there, because there are too many people, assuring the quality, let's put it that way, of those. On the other side, a lot of companies nowadays are struggling with creating that type of cohesion within the team, collaboration, especially since a lot of them were forced to start working remotely, people distributed across multiple locations when before they used to work at the same place together. What are the things that we can learn from the open source movement, or that you have learned from your practice throughout the years, like working with distributed teams, or how much of your experience has been with distributed teams, and what are the things that we can learn from that, so we can all make the distributed work easier and more effective?
Yeah, I'd not really considered that parallel, but I think it's a good parallel, and makes us sort of think, well, what is it about the equivalent commercial environment that we're working in, whereas actually when we're doing it outside of that in the open source community, it seems to work more effectively. And I think that there are, and I've not really thought it through at a great level, but I'll put some ideas out there. I'd be really interested to hear what other people thinking about that parallel. I think there's one element of the fact that actually when you're working on a lot of open source sort of work, there's, how can I put it? There's not a rubber hits the road moment where actually I think the commerciality of our day-to-day job and working with other stakeholders is what makes working in that type of distributed environment different from the sort of open source community. So within the open source community, we're all engineers together. We're all speaking the same language. We all understand each other. In our distributed teams within our company, we've got technical, non-technical. We've got business stakeholders. We've already talked about product. We're not all speaking the same language. We're pulling in potentially separate directions. We've all got our own things that we're trying to achieve. Some of those lie in tension. We talked about technical debt and needing to be commercially savvy and move the product forward in a pragmatic way. So maybe you don't get some of those in the open source world. But then in terms of then working, how do we then help? I mean, it sounds really trite to say, improving our communication. But I've alluded to it in the sense that it's not a technical to technical audience, it's technical to non-technical audience. And so that's always key. Do you know what? I think often when you have to take a company survey, a satisfaction survey, you say, okay, well, what are the main challenges? Often the top answer always comes out of communication. And so communication it's hard even when we're all located in the office. When we're distributed, wow, it's a lot harder. And so there are loads of benefits working in a distributed environment. I think a lot of engineers, me included, have really benefited from the positive side of that. But then there are negatives that mean that we actually have to work even harder at communication. Oh, we've already said communication's hard enough as it is, so we've got to work even harder. And so I think we can use some sort of tools. I think sort of asynchronous communication, I think is really useful, and we can do that within the engineering world. But there's times when we need to really get together. And I think even in distributed teams, one of the things that I am a strong advocate for is the fact that actually we need to bring our teams together from time to time, partly to build trust so that we all connect and we understand each other. But also there are times when we really need that face-to-face time that is really critical and key. So it might be the beginning of a project. We might be workshopping on an architectural approach to something. That's when I think we really need to sort of help and sort of support each other. I realize I've wandered away from the original discussion, which was open source versus, but it's all about that communication, and particularly in distributed environments.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you put it. For now that you were describing this, I was thinking open source, people have chosen to do that, and they are completely aligned with what that project represents or what they're trying to achieve with it. Well, on the other side, we have members of engineering teams who are there for the job, and they are not completely aligned with the company vision, or the company may not have a clear vision communicated with them. So I guess the communication, the sense of belonging, and the purpose as well, because open source people, they don't need to meet because they have already built this trust based on their shared values. In corporate world, we probably need to meet to build that trust. So interesting perspective.
Yeah, great one. And of course, you self-select into the open source community that you want to be part of. And I know you choose the company that you're going to work at the beginning, but then you don't choose everything that you're going to be working on once you're in there. So there's an element of self-selection that I think helps the open source part, but not so much the alternative.
Interesting, but we have a lot to learn from them.
Of course.
I will go with a few audience questions, and then we can wrap up with a final advice for everyone who is looking to optimize their team performance. On-call cycles. So you mentioned them for the Expedia example that you shared, I think. How do you manage the on-call cycles and escalation policies without stepping on the team's work-life balance?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because I've been in different scenarios where we've tried to implement an on-call cycle and understand what that looks like. And often, always there's a commercial factor involved in here. And so you've got that challenge of what the business wants and then what the business is willing to pay, which sometimes means that you're in this halfway situation where it doesn't really work. I think I've alluded to burnout and the fact that we need to be considering engineers' well-being as part of when we're looking at metrics. And that includes on-call. And I think this is really key, that we should not have that expectation that people just do that. It's part of their job. I think it needs to be set up properly. It needs to be properly spoken about what the expectation is for people. It needs to be really clear at the beginning, even when you join the company, that this is what the expectation is, and then people can make those choices based on what they want to do. I mean, there are elements of, I think people write the software, they should be have an element of responsibility for it, and so that we take ownership of what we create. But at the same time, there should not be an expectation, certainly in an unpaid sense, to support it around the clock. And so there's various things that you can do, but I think some sort of headlines are that that work-life balance is key, because it's just if you go down the road of expecting your engineers to jump on every sort of issue out of hours, then that just impacts quality of work. They're tired, that they come in during the week. So you don't overall benefit as an organization. So you need to take that as a factor involved. But I think it's hard when you're working for a startup and you're a little bit bootstrapped because you can't have a really well remunerated on-call policy. So you have to use this best efforts type approach, but it has to be clearly communicated to the business as well that is what we're doing. We're using best efforts, and that there isn't an expectation that engineers are available at every part of the day, weekend, holidays.
Another question. This is more specific to sprint planning, allocating resources, that type of things. How effective is it to distribute equal number of story points in a sprint, in contrast to let each member keep picking as many stories as they can from the backlog?
I like my teams to be largely self-organizing when it comes to, so you've planned the sprint together, you've determined with the product team what it is you're going to try to sort of commit to. And then I like the team to be relatively autonomous in that and to determine how to do that. One of the things, though, I do try to encourage is a pair programming type approach, or a way in which that we're thinking about it as a team together. And so that might be swarming on a particular key feature, or something that the product owner has said, of the sprint items, this is the one that's going to add the most value. And so that everybody, because I think if you take the approach where you almost sort of divide it up and allocate it out, then people are largely thinking about their part of the sprint. And then when it comes to things like code reviews or supporting each other, then you're not going to get so much of that. So I'd rather prefer people to be autonomous within the team to determine that, and to be responsible together to work out how they're going to reach the commitment for that sprint as a general rule. But teams have got to find their own way. As a head of engineering or something like that, I want the team to decide and to work that out. I will support the team in determining what might be best, but I want them to work that out.
Thank you. And one last one before we wrap up. This is in regards to remote teams and collaboration, cohesion within the team. How beneficial do you think periodical random coffee meetings are to the team if they're not focused on certain departments or people that work together? So like a broad company coffee break online.
I like them. So I think what the person who's asking the question, I think like in Slack, you can set up things where you can get random coffees or you get paired with somebody. I like them, but then that's my personality type. I'm more of an extrovert. And so I think it has to be an opt-in type thing if you're going to do that. And that because for some people, that's just a very difficult thing to do. But it's if you want to and you're able to, it's super helpful. I mean, I've really enjoyed getting to know people outside of engineering through that type of approach. I think when you are distributed, it is whether you're distributed or in person, to be mindful that people have different ways of connecting to each other. And there's not one size fits all approach. I had a very sort of funny sort of product owner at Expedia who really his eyes used to sort of fall when maybe the scrum master would sort of say, and as an icebreaker, we're all going to do this. We're going to go around and hug each other. I mean, it wasn't that, but you get the idea that we're going to do something that would take some people really out of their comfort zone. So you should be really mindful of that. But what's really important is that connectedness and making sure that we connect to each other. I'll give you one final idea of something that I've done that I think was quite helpful, and it doesn't involve this, having to have these sort of random coffees or face-to-face meetings. It's something called a pechakucha, which is actually Japanese for chit-chat. I didn't know this. I just came across this. And what it is it's a slide deck with 20 slides, and each slide you're supposed to take 20 seconds on. And you can do this asynchronously. You just record it. And it's a little bit about any topic. So you could use that as a way of learning. But you can also do it to say a little bit about yourself. And I created one for myself, shared it with other people did the same. And so what the purpose of that is about connectedness. And this is where the coffee comes in. Just alternative ways, but making sure that we are connected, because in a distributed organization, it's really key.
Yeah. I think with everything going remote, a lot of virtual meetings, people have started becoming tired from attending another meeting online. But other than that, I also find them very, very useful to connect with people. One last advice to sum up everything, wrap this up. What would you advise people who are looking to improve the performance, the effectiveness of their teams?
I would say to improve the performance effectiveness of the team is try to not be too narrow-minded about what that looks like. We have a tendency as engineers to really focus on some of the metrics and the numbers that just naturally come out of our systems, be it Jira or Git. But trying to think more holistically about some of the, so it might just be things like, actually, productivity is really hampered by interruptions. How do we deal with interruptions? How do we plan our meetings? Because that comes back to the idea of engineers getting into a flow and really getting into it, and particularly if you're working on a very complex project. So as a sort of summary would be, think widely about what this idea of productivity looks like. And you might surprise yourself in terms of actually what are some things that can really impact productivity to the positive. And it might not be that testing environment that we need to sort of work at. It might be. I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than a poor, flaky testing environment. But you get what I'm getting at. Yeah,
excellent way to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for being my guest today. It's been a great pleasure and a very interesting discussion. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for taking part in the Q&As. Love that.
Thank you, everyone who attended. This will go live in the next days on all of our channels. So if you want to rewatch it, share it with people, you'll get notified about that. And join us again next month.
Cool.
Have a great day. Bye.